Hello, welcome everybody. I am MongoSlade. You Mongo maniacs. We're going to be talking about the economics of acting white. This is going to be an interesting subject because I'm going to try to synergize so many different things that I've talked about on this channel before. I'm going to try to synergize a bunch of ideas that I've brought to you guys before. But I also want to bring in some ideas that I just really learned about over the last couple of days. So clearly, these are not things I've studied in real detail, but I've read two or three two or three important papers on these subjects. And I say, man, a lot of this stuff makes sense. And so a lot of you guys maybe have heard of Roland Fryer. We talked about him before on the channel. He was one of the guys that broke down the economics of being inside the Ku Klux Klan. We talked about that when we talked about the Ku Klux Klan. Was this like a month or two ago? So this paper, the economics of acting white, was is another Roland Fryer paper, co-wrote with David Austin Smith, um, and it basically looks to discuss: is there a difference in outcomes when it comes to educational attainment and rejecting or accepting what you could refer to as mainstream or white behaviors, whatever those should be. But in listening to Roland Fryer, I actually realized that this paper it springs from a tree from the economics of identity, which comes from the year 2000, George Akerlof and Rachel Cranton from MIT and Harvard, respectively. So we're going to start there because this is the seed that brings us to all of the subjects we're going to be discussing tonight. So, in the economics of identity, it's a 40-page paper. There's no way I read the entire thing. I learned in grad school to learn to read the introduction, then read the conclusion, right? Um, Everything else in the middle is jargon, right? But you kind of get a sense of the paper if you read the tip and the tail. So I read the introduction and I read the conclusion, and I looked at this and I said, man, it's undoubtedly true. To what degree, that can be questioned, but this is undoubtedly true. So here's what they laid out in the economics of identity: that the first thing you need to have is social differences. In their paper, they talked about gender, men and women, right? And then you have behaviors that affirms these differences. Men do this, women do this. And then you have the third element is that violating certain norms or prescriptions for your side of the aisle evokes anxiety or discomfort, which could hurt or help you. So then you get these four these four pillars of the conversation where you have identity based payoffs derived from your actions that are attached to your social difference. These will be your incentives. As a man, you are incentivized to engage in certain male behaviors. As a female, as a woman, you are incentivized to engage in certain female behaviors. The second bit would be identity based payoffs because of others' actions, meaning if you are identified as a man, certain people are going to have expectations of you and they're going to do certain things that may hurt or harm you based off the idea that you're a man, right? Same thing for women. Then there's the third pillar is that third parties can generate changes in the payoffs, meaning a third party can affect how your incentives work. And the fourth pillar is that some people choose their identity, while others people have the identity thrust upon them or prescribed to them. So obviously that would be some people who make the conscious decision to do certain things, certain identities. And then there are people who have these identities prescribed to them. I don't want to get into the trans issue, but they use gender for a big part of their paper. I'm going to actually use blackness as part of our discussion because that's the major difference I want to look into. So, one of their major points that they're looking to prove here is that identity explains behavior that appears maladaptive, but it may bolster a sense of self, that your identity is an externality and it is an important economic decision. So now that we realize that your identity matters, okay, what you call yourself, how you see yourself matters. They would again, they were discussing men and women, but we don't need to discuss men and women because I want to talk about blackness. So now we have the economic analysis of acting white. This is among black people. So I have a print version of this damn thing. I got it up on my tablet, but I also have a print version. So you might hear papers going back and forth for a while. So in Roland Fryer's paper, it says, quote, many ethnographers argue that peer effects take a particularly insidious form. Black peers and communities impose costs on their members who try to act white. So you're being set up. This is your social difference. You have two black people. One of them is authentically black, whatever that means. The other is acting white, whatever that means. Right? So now you're looking at incentives and payoffs and actions and reactions based off of the behavior of this black person and the identity they have chosen to take, even though it's not really a chosen identity. It is a prescribed identity. It is someone else saying that blackness is this. If you are not engaging in this, you are not black or you're not black enough. Okay? So when you look at Roland Fryer's paper, I shouldn't just give him sole credit, but you give Austin Smith and Roland Fryer's paper. They talked about what Akeroff and Cranton discussed about violating norms and causing discomfort. Right? This plays right into that. So from Fryer and Smith's paper, it says, quote, the key idea is that individuals face a two-audience signaling quandary. Behaviors that promote labor market success are behaviors that induce peer rejection. Individuals are endowed with a two-dimensional type, social and economic. The social type represents their value to the group, and the economic type, their value to the economic market. All social types strictly prefer to be accepted rather than rejected by their peer group. A group acceptance is valuable to the individual. So you're being set up here by being told engaging in certain behaviors will lead to rejection, which we all know. That's fundamentally factual, right? So acting white, being an Uncle Tom, will get you rejected by your peer group. But these are the behaviors that benefit you economically, right? So it's an interesting conversation to have that people have decided to label positive things as Uncle Tomism. Things like showing up on time, for instance. Things like going to school and getting an education. These things are considered you're acting white, speaking good English, reading, especially in your spare time. People have this feeling that you're acting white. You want to be something other than being black. Because in their conception, being black rejects all of these things. And so what you have are individuals who seek to escape being rejected so they don't engage in those behaviors. So why is it important? Well, because when we're talking about social groups, we're talking about sometimes the thoughts of competition or the fact that other people may perceive threats, right? So in the paper, The Economics of Acting White, it says socially compatible group members can be depended upon to support the group in difficult times. So this is why the peer group wants you to behave a certain way, because they want to be able to count on you when things hit the fan, right? So when it's time to go marching, the Million Man March, it's time to go, go vote. They want to be able to count on you. But if you are out here talking about you need to lead the Democratic plantation, they can't count on you. If you're out here saying that hands up, don't shoot was bullshit, they can't count on you. If you were not disgusted by what happened with George Floyd, they cannot trust you. The in group, which has adopted certain behaviors and certain thought patterns, feel like they can't trust you. And therefore, their rejection of you is to save the rest of the group. I mean, it all starts to make a whole lot of a sense when you think about it, right? And it's pretty damn obvious too. Now, from the paper written by Austin Smith and Fryer, quote, the notion that blacks view a set of distinctive behaviors, upward mobility, particular speech patterns, acquiescence to white authority, as selling out, acting white, or Thomism can be traced at least to the well-documented strife between house and field Negroes in everyday plantation life, and seems to have taken hold by the advent of the Black Power movement in the late 1960s. Now, I've read so many books that was written in the 60s. I've written books by guys like Stokely Carmichael. I've read Huey Newton. I've read books from even before then, people like Marcus Garvey, et cetera, et cetera. This is true. Okay? Especially in the 60s and 70s, blackness became a really popular identity group. And it came, a lot of it came from the Black Panthers, the popularity of that group, and the radical social movements of the 60s and 70s. And they have defined a lot of what blackness is. So when people ask me about like Amanda Seales, and she calls herself a black radical, and then she defines radicalism as anything that is opposite of the white power structure or whatever that means, right? That's because she's been reading a lot of radical materials, and a lot of that stuff comes from the 60s and the 70s, where a lot of black identity groups popped up all around the same time. You started seeing now some of these groups they existed before the 1960s and 70s. But many of them found new popularity in the 60s and 70s. I'm talking about the Moorish Science Temple, Black Hebrew Israelites, the Nation of Gods and Earths, the Nation of Islam, the various new African groups, sorts of Black Panther, radical organizations, communist groups, all this sort of stuff. And it stands to reason because a lot of Black people really started going into college in the 60s and 70s. This was their first foray into college as a cohort. Like, there were Black people who went to college before the 60s and 70s, but this was the largest cohort of Black people who went to college at one time. And they're starting to learn more about themselves, and they're adopting Pan-African identities. Some of them are even changing their names. You see a lot of name changes in the 60s and 70s, right? You had Louis Farrakhan, who changed his name twice. He was Louis X, then he was Louis Farrakhan, right? You had Malcolm X, then he was Malcolm Little, then he's Malcolm X, then he's El Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz. You had Stokely Carmichael, who changed his name to Kwame Ture. You had Leroy Jones, who changed his name to Amiri Baraka. You had all this stuff happening in the 60s and 70s. So you start talking about the construction of the Black identity group. There is a group of young people who have the national eye, many of whom are changing their names, becoming more either African or Islamic in their thought process. This is the construction of the Black identity group. This is where you start getting that Christianity is the white man's religion, which virtually did not exist before this time. This is where you start getting, we're going to change our names because those are slave names. This stuff starts happening around this time. This is why you saw so much of it. A group like the Nation of Gods and Earths will have guys change names 5 or 6 times. Constantly trying to, they're wearing new names and new identities, like they're changing clothes. The guy, Clarence Smith, who started the Nation of Gods and Earths, or the 5%ers, went from Clarence Smith, which is his actual name, to Clarence 13X, to Allah, to Father Allah. That's 4 times he changed his name. And there were other members of his organization that changed their name 6 or 7 times. So you see the construction of the Black identity in the 60s and 70s. And they're deciding who the Uncle Toms are, because they're deciding who is down with them. And the people who are down with them are adopting the mannerisms and the behaviors that they put forward. There's a paper called the Shotgun Politics, and it talks a lot about the internals of the Black Panther Party and some of the things that Panther leadership imposed on the members. One of the most major ones were you are not allowed to participate in the capitalist system. You couldn't have a job. So how are these people going to feed themselves? They were told, go liberate the food. If your organization was running out of food, go liberate food. What does that mean? Go steal it. Go rob the grocery stores. Because that's part of being in this organization, is we don't participate in the capitalist system. So now you see the construction of the identity group is starting to go into maladaptive behavior. But there's a reward to it, because you're seen as righteous if you don't participate in that system. You don't participate in the white capitalist system, you're a righteous brother. And if you go to jail, you're a political prisoner. And if you get killed, you're a martyr. So there's all these positives to adopting the Black identity group. And this is from being a criminal. And of course, as you see, there's a lot of these Black Panthers. They were in and out of prison. They were going out recruiting criminals on purpose, gangbangers, recruiting them on purpose. There's a lot of things there that people slept on for years and years, but you see that the Black identity group is being structured in a certain way. So people who were against them were Uncle Toms. Malcolm X was really big on calling people Uncle Toms. Muhammad Ali referred to people who helped him as Uncle Toms. He called George Frazier an Uncle Tom. Not George. Joe Frazier an Uncle Tom. Joe Frazier gave him money when he was broke. He called Joe Frazier an Uncle Tom. He called his hero, Joe Louis, an Uncle Tom. Joe Louis is a war hero. Wasn't the first Black world champion in boxing, but definitely one of the most famous Black men in the country. But Muhammad Ali had to go out there and separate himself from Joe Louis. He had to say Joe Louis was a champion for America. When he went out there and knocked out Max Schmeling, that was for everybody. That was for the United States. He didn't do it for Black people. He did it for the United States. He was an American hero when he did that. Joe Louis never talked down about the country. He never spoke out about racial issues. Well, Muhammad Ali had to position himself as the radical. The Black identity was forward with Muhammad Ali. And in doing that, he disrespected somebody that he even called a hero at one point. His personal hero was Joe Louis. And he called him an Uncle Tom to appease the Nation of Islam and all the other peers that were around him. So now you see how extreme this stuff is. Right? So this is absolutely factual information. So the Austin Smith Fryer paper continues. This dilemma, meaning the field and house Negro dilemma, between racial authenticity and achievement has been documented in many ethnographies and the popular media, though there is no consensus. Now, in the footnotes, they note that it's not just Black people that engage in this, that Italian immigrants in Boston, Blacks in the South Side of Chicago, it even takes place in Japan. And he says, in all cases, high achievers receive a derogatory label from their peer group. Upwardly mobile youth interested in education were labeled mobiles or sissies. So again and again, you see that the peer groups are splitting in half. If you've ever seen the movie A Bronx Tale, Calogero has Sonny and he has his dad, right? The working man is a sucker. That's what he comes up to, right? His dad drives a bus. He thinks his dad is a sucker because he works all day. Sonny doesn't have a job and Sonny is rich. So when it comes to Calogero building his identity, he's rejecting his father and accepting Sonny's identity. He's listening to Sonny. And that's the entire movie is about him learning from Sonny and rejecting the messages and lessons from his father. And then at the end, seeing what Sonny's lessons where that put Sonny, right? So it's not just Black people. Black people are just the focus of this paper, but it could be about any group. Let's continue. It says, quote, the paper, Roland Fryer, Austin Smith, says, quote, there are essentially two conditions that must be satisfied for acting white to be salient. Peer group norms between blacks and whites have to be significantly different, and these norms must influence the educational production function. Later on, it says, first, acting white exists and is remarkably robust across many specifications and subsets of data. There exists a strong statistically significant difference between blacks and whites in the relationship between popularity and grades. So I'm going to skip ahead more. This is a really big paper. This is a huge paper. And it has a lot of statistics and things like that in there. I'm just going to skip all of this because I can't show it to you, so why even go through it? So they get into their interpretation. It says, quote, the evidence is not meant to prove whether or not acting white is an important economic phenomenon. Instead, it endeavors to show that the model's predictions are consistent with empirical facts on the decline of black neighborhoods in the 1970s. And he later says, from chattel slavery through Jim Crow, the value of racial solidarity and group membership was extremely high. In a typical black community, doctors, lawyers, postmen, and others with lower occupational status lived in the same vicinity. Remember, we was talking about redlining, right? This is why redlining was somewhat important, because in black neighborhoods, there were sometimes mixed neighborhoods where you will have your poor and your middle class in the same place. And then he says, we assert that the very presence of institutional discrimination and the lack of mobility eliminated the two audience signaling problem and hits the link between education and acting white. So we're going to start getting into Elijah Anderson's book, Code of the Street, in a second. I've talked about that book so many times on here, but it's going to be very important in discussing this subject. It says one potential puzzle, I'm talking about the Roland Fryer, David Austin Smith paper, says one potential puzzle is the black middle class. Black adolescents in middle school neighborhoods are not achieving academically at the same rate as their white counterparts. Acting white is more prevalent in suburban schools than predominantly black neighborhoods. Now, why would that be? And it says one has to consider the impact of racial segregation in housing. The black middle class are more likely to live in neighborhoods that border black neighborhoods. So we went from the black middle class and the black poor sharing the same area to now there's some separation between the two, but they border each other, which means they're very, very close. And sometimes they're in the same house. They're in the same family. And we're getting very closer to when I'm going to start talking about Elijah Anderson. Again, this paper was written in 2005. Elijah Anderson's book, Code of the Street, was written in 1999. So a lot of this stuff comes out in 99, 2000, 2005. So it continues by saying, quote, black middle class neighborhoods are much more likely to create a buffer zone between black poor and white non-poor. This pattern was repeated for interaction with blue-collar workers, high school dropouts, and the unemployed. Racial loyalty of middle-class blacks meaningful, which could explain lower achievement of middle-class black students relative to their white peers. An important implication of this being that if black high achievers could limit their interactions to only other high achievers, acting white would no longer be salient. Meaning, the idea that you're acting white would not apply if you did not have to interact with other people who were low achievers. What does that mean? That means even if you're a middle-class black kid, if you have friends that are hood, let's say you got some hood cousins and you go see them pretty regularly, they'll make fun of you. So even though your income level would dictate that you go to a good school, you will adopt bad behaviors because you don't want to get made fun of, even if you don't live in that neighborhood. So now we go to Code of the Street by Elijah Anderson. And he talks about there being, quote, decent families and street families. And that these often share the same neighborhood. So he split these two things up. So a decent family is optimistic. They're concerned with the future. They have a high work ethic. It's usually a nuclear family, which means father in the home, married, or at least he's living there. And they're trapped in a dangerous environment. While a street family or a ghetto family is inconsiderate, often disorganized, and they have a limited understanding of their priorities and they're self-destructive. And then this is the most important bit. The street element or the ghetto element dominates the public, meaning they are the ones who set the standards. Why? Well, because they're the troublemakers. And most people just want it. Decent people are conflict avoidant, right? People are like that all the time. Decent folks, they see something going on, they just turn their head and pay it no mind. So the decent families in these neighborhoods who may be working poor, they might be middle class, they put up with it. They put up with the drug dealers and the thugs and the loud 2 a.m. parties and all that stuff they can't do in the white neighborhoods. The black people put up with it. But when it comes to your kid wanting to dress well, speak well, do his homework, well, they don't want no part of that. That's when they start bullying your kid for that. They bully your kid for not having the best shoes, the hottest new shoes, for not really for the way that they speak. I'll give you a good example. The young man, I think his name is Matt Nuclear or something like that. Young guy, he was talking to Amanda Seals. He ended up talking to Ben Shapiro or whatever afterwards. But did you know that one of the things that I saw, nobody discussed his argument. I literally saw grown men, sometimes these men twice his age, talking about his hairline. And I see this again and again. I saw so many people going through that Jubilee episode talking about the hairline of all these guys. They don't hang out in the barber shop. That ain't got fuck all to do with what they're talking about. But this is the kind of bullying that people deal with. You're not one of us because you don't hang out in the barber shop. I can look at your hairline and tell that you're not one of us. What does that got to do with anything? It don't have nothing to do with anything. But that's the kind of behaviors that you see when you separate yourself from the group. When you don't accept, quote unquote, their version of blackness that was constructed in the fucking 60s, they'll talk about your hairline, they'll talk about your shoes, they'll talk about your clothes, they'll talk about a bunch of other unnecessary things. They'll talk about your wife, girlfriend, anything to belittle you and say rally around us. We might be wrong, but at least we all share the same love of appropriate hairlines, I guess. That was the most embarrassing thing that I've ever seen. I've never seen white people do that. I've never seen two white people get into an argument or a debate, and then one of the white people starts talking about the other white guy's hairline. I've never seen that before, ever. It's a Negro thing to do. And they do it all the time. They start signaling. This is what they mean by two audience signaling. It means that as a black person, you've got two audiences. You've got your employers, the people who you are looking to connect with for upward mobility. Maybe you got white friends, maybe you got Asian friends or Arab friends or whatever, and then you got your black friends who might be lower class blacks, your cousins, the Negroes up the street, whatever the case may be. If you lean too far into hanging out with your white friends and trying to be, the good guy who could be upwardly mobile at work, the Negroes will talk about you. They'll whisper and they'll gossip about you. You think you better than us. And if you care about that kind of thing, maybe you'll stop. You'll stop showing up on time. You'll stop volunteering for extra work. You'll stop doing your homework. You'll start going out to hang out with them. Because you care about that. So again, we're back to identity. You have to make a decision. Are you going to adopt the black identity, and which is a basically minstrel black identity? It's all about negativity and rejecting reality, accepting failure and being nihilistic and saying, I'm black, nothing really matters anyway. Racism and systemic racism is going to hold us down, versus accepting it. And you'll see this at the same time with a lot of these black academics. A guy like Mark Lamont Hill, for instance. He'll try to sit down and talk hip hop with Joe Budden, but he went to grad school and all that kind of stuff too, right? He wants to signal both. He wants to double signal. He wants to sit down with Kamala Harris and hang out with Joe Budden. See, he does that so that people won't think, oh, he's getting bougie. He's a part of the boule. He's a boule nigga. So he'll be like, oh, okay, well, I'll hang out in the culture and I'll shoot the shit with them in the culture. But my real job is hanging out with Democrats all day. Upwardly mobile Democrats. You're talking politics with them. Right? That's that too. Now he's been doing it for so long, he's found a nice little niche there where he can do both. And it doesn't really yank him in one direction or the other because he's been doing this for so long. But a lot of young people, they don't know how to dance on that tripwire. They don't want to lose their friends. They don't want to lose what they feel is a connection to something that matters to them in terms of being black. But they also don't want to be poor forever. But they're going to get surrounded by people who are going to say, if you got to kiss the white man's ass, you don't need that job. And if he accepts that, then guess what? He's going to reject upward mobility. He's going to reject the opportunities to network. And these are economic decisions. When you start saying, why are black people at the bottom? These are economic decisions that people are making here. You are, in some ways, people are the summation of their peer group. You don't have any This is why fraternities and sororities were important, because you get into a fraternity, and these fraternities are upwardly mobile blacks, and you had a network of them in a city or a state that could help each other. Sororities, this is what they're for. You create a network of people who know each other, who know you. You know, this guy gets in human resources at a nice little insurance company. He knows you from the frat. He can slide you right on in, get you a decent job. You don't want to sever that connection. But there's things about that connection that's going to be negative, right? Let's continue. From the Austin Smith Rolling Flyer paper, it says, quote, they talked about interventions. How do we help people who are stuck in these situations? So it says that they have engaged in, they've read papers where students were taken out of certain academic environments and enrolling them in different kinds of programs. And some of these programs remove them for their community for a short amount of time, for a day, for the summer, etc. And some are removed from their community permanently, meaning that there is a program that sends you far away. Like when somebody goes into the military, right? You're almost permanently removed from your community if you go to the military. The likelihood of you coming back is quite minimal, okay? But sometimes people do. So it says, if acting white is suppressing achievement, the aim of any intervention must be geared either toward changing the nature or definition of group interactions or eliminating them completely, which have different implications for policy depending on which is pursued. So either you control these interactions, which you can't control. This near monolith of blackness that was created in the 60s, you're not going to change that. Right? So you have to separate from it. And you have to separate from it in a way that allows you to succeed. Meaning you should probably leave your neighborhood. This is why so many people, when they leave home to go to college, they can leave behind their ignorant cousins, their slothful best friends who didn't do nothing but sit around and smoke weed all day. They had to leave those people behind. They had to change their environment. Now that should say something. That should say a lot. Because a lot of black people don't leave their environment anymore. Remember, being black in the United States was constantly people moving around. Like once, and we talked about this before, the Great Migration. There's been several great migrations. After the fall of slavery, there was a great migration off the plantations as blacks had to go and create their own lives. They had to form and reform their own families. Some left to go try to find children that were sold or parents that were sold. Some moved up the road and basically started their own life all over again. And then there was the industrial era, where the middle of the country, Detroit and Chicago, and out west in California and Arizona, whatever, they needed workers. So black people fled from the South into these areas. They left those environments and they went to new environments. Well, that means that they picked up new cultures and new norms. We discussed how that could affect people. A country boy who married his girlfriend at 16 or 17. They got a baby. He can't find a job. He's been working on this farm, and he hears that there's a better job up in Detroit. So he packs up and he goes up to Detroit. But now he's in the big city. There's whores everywhere. There's vice houses everywhere. There's no pastors telling him not to do stuff. His wife's not there to nag him. They don't have a baby to take care of. So he goes up there and he starts making bad decisions, drinking and partying and laying up with all these girls and all this sort of stuff. And that has bad economic juju on the family. And all of this stuff happened. You have immigrants that come into this country and basically do the same damn thing. They come from their country here. They integrate into the United States. And then they send for a family and bring them back, bring them up, if they remember to do so. There's plenty of stories of immigrants who basically just say, screw it. I got family in Italy. I get to them when I get to them. I'm having fun right now. But it's amazing to me that this is one of the policy interventions. They say, look, if you have a kid with potential, you got to get him out of the hood. Because this whole acting white thing might be suppressing his grades. If he's getting bullied for being a smart kid, he's getting bullied for wearing glasses, he's getting bullied for liking to read, get him out of there. How many parents are willing to let their kid leave? Sometimes the parents is the biggest anchor on the kid. The parents can't afford it, or they just don't want their kid to leave home. So this is kind of a longer part. This is part of their conclusion. It says the main results from the model yield the motivating stylized facts regarding acting white and underachievement documented in the anthropology and sociology literatures regarding low-income populations across the world. There exists no equilibria in which all types of individuals adopt distinct educational investment levels. All equilibria satisfied a standard refinement involve a partition of the type space in which all types accepted by the group pool on a common low education level and all types rejected by the group separate at distinctively higher levels of education with correspondingly higher wages. That's part of their conclusion. So they proved that group cohesion exists up to the point of higher levels of education. So black people get along as long as everybody's dumb. If everybody's only got like a 6th to 8th grade education level, we'll all get along. As soon as somebody goes to college, that's a problem. Right? So as somebody start, it's almost like a crab in a barrel kind of situation, right? You trying to climb yourself out, they're like, no, be like us, dragging you back in. I remember my granddad said that to me once. He said, it was like maybe a month or two before he passed away. He said, how many more books you gonna read? He started making jokes about, it wasn't an acting white joke. It was basically you've got enough schooling. You don't need any more school. Right? You've done enough. And that stuck with me. Even though I agreed at that point, though, I don't think I could have taken another semester of school. But that goes to show there's also a generational thing. He didn't see the value. My grandfather didn't even finish high school, if I don't remember correctly. And he didn't see the value in all this stuff that I'm learning and these things that I'm talking about. Why would anybody care about this stuff? But we're dealing with this at a societal level. We have large numbers of Black people who are holding back other Black people by calling them Uncle Toms. Race traders, shouting them down. Like I said, in 2005, or was it 2004, when Kanye West said, George Bush don't care about Black people. 20 years later, he was wearing a Trump hat. Look at the reactions of those people at the same time. One of the reasons Kanye West became the most popular artist was because he did stuff like Spaceship, which is complaining about menial wage jobs. He made songs like Crack Music, which blamed drug selling on the government and the CIA. He was seen as a conscious rapper, right? And then over time, he became more egotistical, more self-focused. He became a little bit more conservative, and all of a sudden, these people will say, Kanye West is what happens when Negroes can't read, or when Negroes don't read. And they bring all these people on CNN to make fun of him. This is what they mean by keeping Negroes in their place. You're not allowed to achieve too far ahead of the rest of the group. And you should not even be ambitious enough to chase that. So they continue by saying, acting white is not unique to Blacks, and we purposefully reference other groups plagued by similar phenomena. Various insidious forms of social interaction, such as acting white, exist, but it does not imply that nothing can be done about them. Improved labor markets, group incentives, and means for supporting implicit community-specific contracts are likely to undermine acting white. It says acting white is an equilibrium phenomenon, the consequence of two audience signaling. So I skipped through their entire paper. It's a really long paper, but we got all we needed out of that paper. And we got all we needed out of the economics of identity, but we're not done here. Because I want to talk about this stuff some more and give you a really good example of what we're talking about here. Okay. So now we know that the acting white phenomenon is a real thing and it has real effects on people. Right? So we know that it's real. It has real effects on people. We started learning about Black conservatives and Black liberals, which almost always end up being socialists because they're the ones who defined and created the Black identity. The Black identity for conservatives, what I see is often the conservatives will find some other identity and elevate that. While Black liberals and socialists, they center the Black identity. Now, what I mean by this is that how you view the world is through your ideology. The Black socialist, the Black liberal, they view everything through the lens of race. So everything is racist. If it has a negative outcome for Black people or even a Black person, it's racist. They're unable to separate themselves from Blackness. Even when they're not engaging in behaviors and norms that are associated with Blackness, they will then associate those things with Blackness because they can't separate themselves. They're victims of peer pressure. And it's very limiting in their thinking too. Look at how many things these guys get wrong. Smart people to some degree, but they get things horribly wrong because the only way that they view the world is through race. So they refuse to delineate. This is one of the things that you have with Black socialists is everything is us. Us, we is everything. The number one thing that you'll often see people splinter off about is criminality. You know, the Black community should rally around people who are obviously wrong. Obviously, George Floyd. You're supposed to walk in lockstep, be on code about George Floyd, because there's no such thing as anything beyond the race. The race is everything. This is also why Black liberals and socialists swallow wholesale all the trans and LGBT stuff, because those people can be Black. But when it comes to Black conservatives, they usually center something else. People like Jason Whitlock, people like Chad O. Jackson, they center being Christians first. So they don't have that same racial loyalty. So you'll often see them lambast things like rioting, the George Floyd stuff, because to them, their Christian values are more important than whatever Negro values that are constantly changing that comes up with these socialists. And people will say, well, no, that's not true. Yes, it is. I literally saw in the Black Panther newspaper, they went from being anti-abortion, saying that abortion is genocide, to flipping it just a few months later, promoting abortion as a woman's right to choose. It's constantly shifting. Jesse Jackson shifted on that. He wanted to run for president. All of a sudden, he's pro-abortion after being anti-abortion for so many years. You'll see this also when it comes to things like policing in the neighborhoods. You got these people who believe that, well, in recent years, we saw body cameras, Black Lives Matter, and all these assorted organizations that are basically just other versions of Black Lives Matter demanded body cameras. And then when the body cameras started to show that it was Black people acting up, it wasn't just random police officers knocking Negroes over the head. They say, oh, we don't want to live in a police state. We don't want to live in a surveillance state. Why are cops having cameras in your face all the time? This was within the span of a couple of years. I'm not even talking about, from the crack era to 2000, where we flipped from there's not enough police officers in the neighborhood to we're over policing. Like, that shift was there too. The police don't care about us. We got gangs everywhere. There's people dying in the street every day. And then 20 years later, we're over policed. What the hell are you talking about? The crime hasn't changed that much. You still got gangbangers and drug addicts everywhere. But their values are constantly changing because these are peer-based values. Whatever the group has adopted, these people are expected to adopt it, because this is what your Blackness is attached to. This is why so many men woke up when they read the Black Lives Matter website and they saw that fathers were omitted. All the men who say, I'm going to be a father one day, or I am a father, that's part of my identity. You're telling me that that doesn't matter? All Black Lives Matter had to do was put fathers on the goddamn website. And you would have a whole lot of people who would continue supporting Black Lives Matter, even though they were dead wrong. Even though they took money and ran off, they just still been supporting them. But they made a fatal mistake, and they went after the men. They omitted men. It was an identity group they didn't want anything to do with, because the organization was created by fat black lesbians. So they refused to delineate. They refused to hold standards. These are peer-based standards. Tariq Nasheed is trying to figure out how to define FBA. Is it a lineage? Is it blood and soil? What is it? He doesn't know. He just made some shit up and then trademarked it. He didn't put too much thought into it. He started doing documentaries and shit talking about it. But he created a new in-group. And this new in-group started attacking another out-group, which is all the immigrants that are taking our scholarships and moving in our communities and taking advantage of us. And ADOS, they're the same thing. And they're a little bit more organized than the FBAs, but they do the same thing. But what you have with the black conservatives is typically they would put something else first. They're X first, Christian first. They're a member of the military or something like that first. They put their country first. I'm an American first, black second. For the black socialist, the black communist, the black liberal, being black is the first thing about them. They're black first. And then they're man or woman or whatever. But for conservatives, they're themselves, for they're a person first. And these are the values that are attached to them. And some of these values are really kind of unchanging, especially if they're biblical values. You can't change those. You can ignore some, I guess, but you can't really change them. And this ties into Cornel West when we talked about him before on this channel, where he criticized black conservatives for trying to discredit black organizations and institutions like the NAACP and the Urban League, etc., as being basically dinosaur organizations that don't help black people. And they don't. They're essentially bourgeoisie organizations. He criticized them for having a loyalty to the United States when the United States is not helping Africa or supporting Israel or whatever. This is from a book from 1993. He criticized black conservatives for not dealing with blacks' needs. Said they engage in respectability politics and they're obsessed with the moral fabric of American blacks. Throughout history, there's been tons of books written on the black middle class. Books like Our Kind of People, Black Bourgeoisie, Black Metropolis, etc. All of them where either a socialist like E. Franklin Frazier, who wrote Black Bourgeoisie, is attacking the black middle class for wanting to separate from their ignorant Negro cousins who don't want those people in their neighborhoods. And this is a notorious thing. In the 30s and 40s and 50s, when those people were coming up from Alabama and Arkansas and or Tulsa or whatever, and they're coming to the big cities, those middle class blacks did not want that. They didn't want those people there because they knew the kind of situations, the kind of behaviors and thoughts that they were bringing with them. And they weren't even woke yet. The wokeness didn't kick in for another 15 to 20 years. And that woke shit took over. Now you got to be down with the crew. And it happened to Martin Luther King. He was one of the first ones to be the victim of wokeness. Because Martin Luther King, he was too woke for the NAACP, too radical, too communist for the NAACP. But then he found he wasn't communist enough for Stokely Carmichael. And they was making fun of him. Because for starters, he was a Christian. Well, he allegedly a Christian. And so Stokely Carmichael was dissing it. Because Stokely Carmichael was a Pan-African. Again, changing his name, radical, talked about violence, tried to redefine how Black people should be in the United States, calling us a colony of the United States, which is ridiculous. All these sorts of things that were coming up. And it forces milquetoast people to be radicals. Because you can't be milquetoast. And these people make economic decisions. This stuff dictates how your life turns out. The decisions that you make dictate how your life turns out. The kind of things that I talked about in my previous video about responsibility. A lot of the Black stuff embraces irresponsible behavior. The Nation of Gods and Earths, right? They support reproduction, but they don't support marriage. They don't support government bonding, like, you being married under the law. You can have an earth, a wisdom, and you can sit down and have children with her if you want to. But they absolutely suggest polyamory, and some of these guys end up with 20 to 30 kids. They're creating broken families through their ideology. The identity that they have chosen as that they are God of the earth, the creator of everything. I can have as many wives, earths as I want, and it is my responsibility to plant seeds in that earth. If I have a woman, it is my responsibility to plant a seed in that earth. So if she has 6 of my children, and I have another woman, she has 4 of my children, that's good. Again, when you go back to the economics of identity, it's an incentive. These men get together and they create an incentive, a social structure that incentivizes them to behave in a way that is economically destructive. Having all these children is economically destructive. All these children with no father. No fathers in the household. Dad doesn't make enough money to have 24 kids. But they did it, and they were doing it, and the women were okay with it because, again, they're part of the same movement. So you had this sort of stuff. These are economic ideas. Lil Wayne having all these kids out of wedlock, spreading his seed all over the country. Well, he can get away with it because he's a millionaire rapper. But we've seen basketball players like Sean Kemp get completely destroyed because he had 12 kids by all these different women. These are economic ideas. They have outcomes. Ideas have outcomes. Dropping out of school early to go chase paper in the street is an economic choice. This is where you get your negative outcomes from. Now I'm going to go to Monster by Cody Scott, Sainika Shakur, who I keep forgetting that he changed his name to. This is why he decided to become a gangbanger. This is from page 100. Monster Cody says, quote, I just couldn't imagine living the life of a Hook. Those seemingly spineless nerds who are always victims of someone's ridicule or physical violence, who never responded to an affront of any type. I had, while in primary school, been victimized by cats during their ascent to, quote, king of the school. My milk money was taken. My lips were busted 2 or 3 times, not because I decided to defend my dime or my honor, but because my assailant simply whacked me. Early on, I saw and felt both sides of the game being played where I lived. It was during my time in elementary school that I chose to never be a victim again, if I could help it. There was no gray area, no middle ground. You either banged or held strong association with the gang, or else you were a victim, period. To stress this, when we made appearances at high schools, we often jump hooks and take their money, leather jackets, hats, and such. End of quote. A hook is a person who was acting white. They didn't want to be in the gang. Gang banging is a part of Black culture now. Did you notice that we've borrowed so much language from gang banging? Turning out, high rollers, ballers, all this sort of stuff comes from gangs. You guys, what was that, Venus or Serena, whose sister got killed by a gangbanger? She's crip walking. Well, crip walking is not gang banging anymore. It's a part of Black culture. Yeah, the part of Black culture that killed hundreds of thousands of Black boys. Yeah, sure. But it's willingly accepted as part of Black culture. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. But you see how he defined it. You're a hook. You're a victim. We pick on you because we can, and you're not going to do anything because that's a decision that you made. If you were a real nigga, you'd be like us. That's the peer pressure. We want to beat you up unless you join us, and then we'll go beat up somebody else together, me and you. But that's the economic idea. That's because this guy who's sick of getting beat up, he joins the gang. The gang pressures him to go and shoot somebody. The gang pressures him to go sell dope. Then he gets smoked in the street or he goes to prison. There ain't no retirement for gangbangers. There ain't no retirement for drug dealers. But to discuss this is taboo. You're a conservative. Why are you talking down on your brothers? These are stupid ideas. This is stupid. This is not making people upwardly mobile. They don't want that. They're looking for something. They're looking for something else. You're ambitious. They're nihilistic. All right? You're optimistic. They're nihilistic. Monster Cody in the book also discusses change. I don't want to search through that book and look for the word change. And he talked about how everything changes, and his life was was full of change. He went from jail to jail, cell to cell, school to school. But the only thing that didn't change was the hood. The set never changed. So that's why they were so loyal to it, because it was the one thing that never changed in their life. And that's something to consider. It's a stupid thing to consider, but it's something to consider. So throughout this entire hour, and the hour and 15 minutes that I've had you guys here, We've learned that identity matters. How you choose to see yourself, what kind of person you are, it matters a whole lot. And it actually dictates a lot of your success. How comfortable are you with rejection? How comfortable are you with not having friends of the same sex or friends of the same gender, friends of the same race, or whatever the case may be? But then you can start applying this to anything. Pickup artists and all these guys, when they basically tell you to adopt, they say don't be a simp, meaning you adopted a simp ideology, you've adopted a simp behavior set. Simps behave like this, simps thinks this way. You have to accept a different behavior set. It almost always involves being a millionaire and getting in the gym, right? But this is how the world works. The kind of decision that you make are because of the kind of identities you have accepted. Monster Cody is a perfect example of somebody who accepted when he was younger. I think he said he joined the set when he was like 11, right? 11 years old, he made this decision that impacted the rest of his life. 11 years old, he joined the gang. Spent untold amount of time either killing somebody, trying to kill people, or in jail. He could have made different decisions. But his life was set right then. And people do these things without really considering it because he's an unfathered child. But when people go and get face tattoos, face piercings, they're telling people right off the rip, I'm not going to become a lawyer or a doctor or anything like that. These are signals that you've essentially given up. And we don't pay attention to that anymore because we're being told to accept everything. They have this new Crown Act, right? Where now employers can't even talk about your hairstyle and all that kind of stuff, which is all these things that were supposed to signal to people that you're a serious professional person. They're not allowed to discuss anymore. But it's obvious to everybody. If your parents named you DeQuisha, they weren't serious people and you probably didn't have a good education growing up. And then they'll claim, the people who center blackness will say, that's not fair, that's racist. You're attacking us based on our names. Well, there's behaviors that are attached to that. There is a mentality that is attached to how you name your children. There is cultural distinctions to that. To you hiring all these Daquanas, these Tawanas. This stuff has an economic outcome. It tells people who they are. All right. That's all I got. I appreciate you guys for stopping by. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.